Hello everyone, this is Khaled and I'll be your instructor for this Python course provided by Learning while Practicing. In this video, we'll be talking about loops in Python. So loops are like some constructs in the programming language that are used to do some repetitive work. For example, for doing the same kind of work over and over again over a sequence of data. So that would be a good fit for using loops in this situation. So let's get started. So the first kind of loops that we're going to be talking about is the for loop. So the for loop is one of the most popular kinds of loops in any programming language, and it works like this. So we have for, and then we define some variable, let's say I, and then we define the range from which I would be taken, or the range over which I would be iterating over. So we can do this by using a function called range in Python, and this function returns a range or a list of integers. And as we'll be seeing in the list tutorial, we'll be talking more about that. But in this video, let's just assume here if we say, for example, range of 5, it returns a list or a range from 0 to 4. So the start here would be 0, and the last number would be 4. Let's try this and print what would be I in this case, and then run this code. So if we run here and print that, so we can see here that this code is printing 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 4. So it goes, so this range returns a list of integers starting from 0, and the last item here is 4, which is not including that number that we defined here. But what if we want to define a different range? What if we want to start from a different number than 0 and end at a different number? So we can also use range in a different way. We can first comment that code up. So in order to comment that code, we can just press Control/ that comments the code in PyCharm. Okay, so let's try another thing. Let's say for j in range, and then we need to define a start and end. So we can start, let's say we start with 2, and then let's say the end is 8. And print j, and let's see what happens. Okay, so here as we can see, the start here starts with 2, which is the number that we have defined, and then prints all the numbers all the way over to 7, so which is 8 minus 1. So that is another way of using range. We can define the start and the end. We can also define the step, so it doesn't always have to be only a step of 1. We can define our step. So let's try this. So let's say for x in range, let's say 2 and 10 and 2. So here the start should be 2, and that is the step. Let's say the step here is 2. So it will go and print. So x here would be 2, 4, 6, and so on until it reaches 8. So let's try this. Yes, so as we can see here, it starts with 2, and then 4, 6, and 8. Of course, it doesn't print 10 because the range here ends with 9. So 9, if we go a step of 2, it would be out of the range, so it doesn't print that. Okay, so this is the basic usage of the for loop. We have also some other kind of loops, which is the while loop. So a while loop needs a counter. So while, and then a condition. And then we have here the body of the loop. So let's say that we have some variable, let's call it count, and it starts with 0. And then we say that the condition here is while count is less than 5. Let's print count. And then we increment count. So count equals count plus 1. And then run that. So as we can see here, count starts with 0, and then it enters this while loop. It evaluates this condition. If the condition is less than 5, or if count is less than 5, which is true in this case, it prints count, so it prints 0 here. and then it increments count by 1. So here count is 1, and then goes over the loop again, checks the condition, count now is 1, 1 is less than 5, yeah, so it prints count, and go increment, and so on until it reaches 4. So 4 would be the last number which would be printed for this while loop. So this is another kind of loop. We can, let's talk about something else. We have something called the continue and the break in the loop. So the continue keyword is used to simply ignore the current iteration for this loop and go directly to the next iteration. For example, let's say that we're having a for loop. Let's say that we have a for loop for I in range, let's say 10. And we don't want to print every number in this range. We only need to print the even numbers, okay? So one way that we can do this is that we can say inside this loop, if the number is even or if the number is odd, just ignore it. So if I modulo 2 is not equal to 0, so here that means this is an odd number. So this condition means that this number, the remainder of the division of that number by 2 is not 0. It means that an odd number. Because for all even numbers, the remainder of the division by 2 should be 0. If we have, for example, let's say 8 by 2, that's 4, and the remainder, of course, is 0. 10 by 2, that's 5, and the remainder of 0. So that is a good way to test even an odd number. So even numbers would have always a remainder of 0, otherwise that would be an odd number. Okay, let's go back to here. So we need to print all of the odd numbers, all of the even numbers between 0 and 10 in this case, so up to 9. So what we're doing here inside this loop, we check for each number that we're going over, and we see if it is an odd number, we can just ignore it. So in order to ignore it, we have this keyword continue. Okay, so continue here would simply ignore this current iteration of the loop and go over to the start again if this loop is not out of the range yet. Okay, so we need to print other numbers. So print I. So if we have reached that point, it means that we haven't ignored this current iteration of the loop. So it means that we have an even number right here. So we can just simply print it, which is what we need to do. Okay, so let's try this out. Okay, as we can see here, it actually prints all of the even numbers between 0 and 10. So that's 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8, and so on. Okay, so yeah, that's one way. Of course, we could do that the other way. We could just, let's comment that out. Could do for I in range 10, and then if the number is actually even, the remainder is 0, then just print that number, which will be exactly the same result. Okay. Another thing that we could use, or another keyword that is useful in loops, is called break. So break, instead of ignoring just the current iteration of the loop, it just gets out of the loop immediately. So it's not executing any subsequent iteration, not only ignoring the current iteration. So for example, let's say that we're doing the while loop again, and while let's say while count is less than 5, and we need to get out of the loop when we reach the first odd number. Okay, so we do this, we check if that is an odd number, the same way with the number, the remainder by 2 is not 0, so we know that is an odd number, and we just break. Otherwise, we increment count. Count equals count plus 1. Okay, and we can just print number here. So print count. I'm sorry, this is count I. And let's try this. Okay, so as we can see here, when we okay, so for the first iteration, number here is 0. The condition is satisfied, it is printed, and then we can see if it's odd, it will get out of that loop and then increment. Okay, that's not the case here because 0 is even, so it continues. And then for the second number, it would be 1. 1 is less than 5, I'm sorry, okay, and then it would be printed. Test again is whether this number is odd or not. It finds out it is odd, so it immediately breaks out of the loop. It doesn't even execute this number and gets out of the loop and doesn't execute any of the subsequent iteration. Although we still haven't reached the condition where the count is equal to or greater than 5. But here we have set a condition whenever we encounter the first odd number, it breaks out of the loop. So break could be also useful in many, many kinds of applications by setting a condition that gets you out of the loop whenever that condition is satisfied. So this is also one of the most important keywords while dealing with loops in Python. Okay, so that would be it for this lesson for the loops, and hopefully see you in the next lesson.